Thanks, Julianne. Thank you for coming, and for those on Zoom. Today we are shifting our emphasis a little bit in this course on addiction. We are going now into addictive behaviors. And today's speaker is Dr. Joy Gabrielli, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Clinical and Health Psychology at UF. She received her master's in clinical psychology at the University of Montana and a PhD in clinical child psychology at Kansas. Dr. Gabrielli specializes in the treatment of adolescents and families and is trained in trauma-focused intervention that is both individual and family-based. She has already several publications. Today she will discuss how digital environments promote addictive behavior in young people, primarily from the perspective of how youth are exposed to marketing and substance use behavior from peers online. Joy, please welcome Joy Gabrielli.
Hello, thank you for having me. So I'll just pause for a moment and say this is a work that comes across at least 10 years. And I really began this work at the lab studying media and youth behavior at Dartmouth College, and then brought some of that work down to where I am today here at University of Florida. So it's been just a really informative, it's okay. A really informative, wonderful process of learning for me. And I think it's an important area of research because we're continuing to see media and technology evolve, and youth behavior is co-evolving along with those innovations in technology. So today I'll be talking about media influences on addictive behaviors in youth, and I'll present information from a variety of different studies. But I want to start us out by just understanding a little bit about how we think about child behavior and development. So Bronfenbrenner has this wonderful socio-ecological model, and in this model we think about child identity and development, where child characteristics really fall at the center of the model. And then proximal influences, so things like family, church, school, and peers, have direct influence on that child behavior. Then there's this mesosystem where there's interactions that happen between those entities, so interactions that happen between parents and school and parents and church. And then the exosystem is more influences that are more sociocultural, so the government, mass media, industry, and the macrosystem then includes attitudes and ideologies from the culture. This model was developed, decades ago and continues to inform our research processes today. But you'll notice that it doesn't include any information about media and technology, which has completely reshaped how we think about the world. Today, kids are growing up as technosapiens. Basically, they live in a digital world. They are digital natives. They understand media and technology better than we do as adults. Kids can understand media and technology better than technological innovators. They're very fast at learning new technologies, and it's integrated in all aspects of their lives, in school, at home, in their social activities, in their play activities. So really, we should think about an update to this model. And that update includes media and technology influences that hit across every single level of this model. So at the individual level, children are tasked with building a built world, lived world, environment identity, and a digital identity. At the microsystem level, kids are carrying around personalized media devices that they're accessing and interacting with people all the time. They're also being impacted by media and marketing through those personalized individual media devices. And so they're getting directly influenced in terms of their ideas and thoughts and behaviors through those devices. Then at the mesosystem level, we see things like smartphones and online video games and social media are facilitating interactions between those microsystem influencers, right? So we see kids having to do a lot of homework online. And we see schools telling parents to download this app so your child can practice this new skill. And we see kids interacting with their peers or strangers or people from their family across the country through social media. So it has a huge connecting force in our society today. And then even at the exosystem level, you see this much stronger connection that happens between industry and mass media because of these multi-component, multi-armed media campaigns that industry is using to deliver their messaging across all different venues, through movies, through TV, through advertisements, through social media, through advert games that kids can play. So there's this incredible intersection that's happened in the last 15 years or so between addictive behaviors and technology. And I just have a few examples here for you. Kids can become Facebook friends with alcohol industries. You can become friends with Budweiser. You can become friends with Coors Light. Every alcohol brand has a social media account across every social media platform. You have these advertising games where kids can, knock over these alcoholic drinks and get points for participating and engaging. You have vaping devices and other e-cigarette devices where now even the delivery of the substance has become technological. And you have things like video games where kids can actually make their characters become drunk as part of the video game play. So it's socializing them across every single level of their interaction with the world. And we know, generally, addictive behaviors in youth is a huge problem. I don't think I need to belabor this point too much, but here's just a few points of negative outcomes that we know are associated with addictive behaviors. You see things like academic problems and school truancy. If you initiate substance use behavior early, you have an increased risk for addiction and escalation of substance use behavior problems across your entire lifespan. You see increased likelihood for risky sexualized behaviors. You see higher levels of mood disorders, disruptive behavior disorders, and things like system involvement with the juvenile justice system. You see higher rates of aggression and fighting happening between peers. You see family disruption. You see parent-child conflict. It goes on and on and on and on. The same is true for things like overuse of media and technology. You see all of these similar problems. We just don't have the science yet. So a lot of my talk will be focused today on the link between media exposures and addictive behaviors. But we've had many a conversation already today about the fact that media use and technology use in and of itself can become something that is overused for some kids. So one of the things that I want you to think about today is the idea that the media can be a facilitator for depictions of behavior. What's good behavior? What's problematic behavior? What's appropriate? What are the consequences of different behaviors? And we like to think in our lab about media as a sort of delinquent super peer. This term has come up in the literature quite a few times. The reason for that is because in media, kids can engage with peers, they can engage with influencers or, famous people that they feel like they have connections to. So the behaviors that they're seeing in people online or through movies or television draws very close to the individual when it's on your personal device. But it also has heavy, heavy impact because it can come from people who are highly, highly influential. You can also be hit with the same message across multiple domains, multiple relationships, multiple people. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of the breadth of this scientific literature. I'm not going to go into all these studies, but I come from a lab where we did a lot of content coding of movies. And we looked at the movies and we would count how many exposures there were in the movie to alcohol depiction, tobacco depiction. This started in the space of tobacco work, and it rose to the level after study, after study, after study, after study, after study, showing that there was a link between movie smoking that kids were exposed to and early initiation and progression of smoking behavior in youth. This science rose to the level where the Surgeon General identified a causal link between movie exposure to smoking and youth initiation of smoking behavior. And that is why today we don't see as much smoking in movies. It's a tremendous public policy win for us in terms of prevention of child health risk behaviors. What's interesting is the rest of our science has not quite caught up. So the rest of our policy is still lagging behind. So we have demonstrated the same effects in movies with alcohol use. We've done that longitudinally. We've done it across labs. We've done it across countries. We've shown time and time again that when kids are exposed to alcohol or smoking in the media, primarily movies, that increases their risk for initiation of those behaviors. We are now also starting to see those links happen between risky sexual behaviors. When kids are exposed to mature media content of any kind, it increases their risk for a lot of different engagement and risky health behaviors. This is a little bit hard of a slide to interpret, but what I want to walk you through is the fact that some people have said, media is just one tiny influence, and maybe it's shown to be connected in the literature, but it's probably not as impactful as other things like peer substance use or parent substance use, and that is just not true. So you look at this range of different things, ethnicity, race, parent education, parenting practices, extracurricular activities, sibling smoking, how people spend money, rebelliousness, cigarettes available in the home. And what we see is that when kids are exposed to movie smoking behaviors, the relative risk of that exposure falls on the higher end of all of these other factors that we know are important for child substance use behavior. This is true for both initiation and progression to substance use problems. We see the same exact thing in alcohol use. So across all these different factors, I know this is probably hard for you to read, but there's things like in here like parent alcohol use, or alcohol availability at home, or rebelliousness. High levels of alcohol movie exposure is substantially impactful in the scope of all of these other things. And what's interesting about this is just one domain of media. This is just movies. So we know kids are exposed to a lot of different types of media, and today's media, the social media, is much more interactive, much more engaging. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to understand today's media exposures. What is happening to youth today? And we wanted to look at how kids were being exposed to social media depictions of alcohol use and vaping. And we know that this explosion of social media behaviors in kids and availability and different types of social media apps has resulted in an unprecedented level of mature media content exposures for kids. And we know that social media is different than traditional media in a lot of ways because you can engage much more deeply in social media. You can spend much more time using social media. It can be pervasive all across your entire day. It can be in the middle of the night and your parents might not know that you're doing it. It follows you everywhere. And social media also has this identity formation component to it, where I'm presenting myself on social media. So what I like, what I share, what I post, all of that has some implications for how my peers and friends and family view me. And we also know social media enables kids to have lots of different identities. So most kids, most adolescents have multiple Instagram accounts, multiple TikTok accounts. They have their parent-known account, and then they have a bunch of hidden accounts that their parents don't know about, where they're engaging in some of these behaviors to try things on and to maybe explore more mature content. But there's substantial implications there for how it might relate to their substance use behaviors. The other thing is, it's very difficult to track and monitor these exposures. In movies, we know if a child has seen a movie and we can content code that movie content. For these types of behaviors, it's so broad, it's happening so frequently that it's almost impossible to summarize what the actual exposures are. And then if you think about parents and what they're responsible for, it becomes nearly impossible for them to fully parent in those environments. So I should warn you before I get to these next slides, I'm going to show you some actual images from our study. And so these are things that folks have actually been exposed to, young people have been exposed to, and they've shared these exposures with us. And there's a few points I want to make. One is that not all of the exposures are alcohol promoting. And that's important for us to remember, that these digital environments, while they invoke some level of risk for youth, there might be opportunities within these environments to promote health. So we should be thinking creatively about that. And some of the messages are vague. And so how kids interpret those messages might have more to do with them and their immediate environments than it does the actual exposure. But the first round of pictures I want to show you is we had some kids upload pictures that were clearly alcohol promoting. So you have some influencers drinking, you have this sort of fanciful image of a woman drinking, then you have this travel image showing drinking across multiple contexts in this traveling across the world that participants did. So you can see how if children are being exposed to this, it seems to promote the fact that drinking is fun, drinking is associated with beauty and glamour, and there are no real negative depictions here. So most of the time when kids are getting exposed to advertisements or alcohol use in the media, it's not showing the negative outcomes that can happen following excessive use. Then there's some neutral content that kids are being exposed to. So there's a lot of cocktail images, how to make this cocktail, how to make that cocktail. There's just alcohol kind of in the immediate forefront or in the background, but not really a target of the actual depiction. And then you probably can't see this, but there's wine glasses across the table in this. So this is an advertisement for a show. And so it's just showing, how pervasive alcohol can be across these different domains. Then there's this potentially negative content. So there's folks saying, I'm gonna drink, and then, oh, I drank so much, and now I feel like I'm gonna die. And then folks, showing some accidental behaviors that can happen when they're drinking as well. And then we are also seeing more and more pervasive anti-alcohol content, which is mostly not coming from the users themselves, it's coming from other places, which is interesting. But you see there's some videos of individuals who passed away while they had overdrank. You see some examples of, how drinking can associate with other risk behaviors and cause problems. You can see some advertisements that are focused on the impacts it can have on the brain, and then some direct recommendations to stop drinking. So it is possible that kids are also being exposed to media content that is promoting drinking reduction. Globally, what I wanted to share with you is that this is pervasive and it really does matter. So we're seeing that kids are using media devices more than ever before. Most older adolescents say that they are online nearly all the time. So they feel like they have access to the internet pretty much at any given time. And we see that there's a lot of conflict in things like child and parent relationships around media and technology. Parents don't know what to do about it. Kids don't want their parents to be restricting them. Kids know more about technology than parents do. So how we oversee child development in this domain is quite complicated. But we do know that some of the most effective parenting practices that exist in the literature already, just good parenting for promotion of positive child behavior, are also true in the media environment. So things like utilizing effective discipline, monitoring what your child is doing online, thinking about teaching your child problem-solving practices around exposures, engaging in positive parenting, guiding your child towards positive media interactions, and also reinforcing your child for using healthy media behaviors. All of those things will promote better child behavior in the media environment. And one thing that's missing here is also now we have the need for media literacy training. Kids need to learn how to engage the media environment and learn how to interpret media messages because they're quite complicated to interpret, even for adults. Even adults aren't aware of how much we're being exposed to substance use in our media environments. So coming back to this model, what I want to point out is that we have an opportunity. Obviously, if we could impact media environments at this exosystem level, if we could regulate what kind of advertising is happening, through alcohol industry, through cannabis and vaping industries, that's most effective for prevention across the board. It's passive prevention and it works the best. But it was really effortful to get the tobacco regulation policies into place. We aren't making a ton of movement in the alcohol domain right now, even though there's these very clear links. So one of the better opportunities we have if we want to have immediate impact is working with families. And that's where a lot of my work centers right now, is how do we work with parents in learning media literacy skills to be able to support their kids in learning media literacy skills. So the question, what can we possibly do to mitigate this risk? Should we just give up? Because a lot of parents get to that point in their interaction with kids. A lot of parents say, I can't handle it. My child is smarter than I am in technological environments. They know how to use these devices in devious ways. I am not entirely sure how to navigate, how to teach them things. What do we do? And one of the things I want to point out is this is from one of the studies we did looking at the media exposures through movies. And we were curious to know, one simple thing. If parents just restrict R-rated movie exposure for kids, these were kids who were between the ages of 10 to 14. If they just restricted there, would there be any association with their drinking behavior? And it's a resounding yes. This is a simple association, but what you see is that, when parents are saying they do not let their kids watch R-rated movies, they have a much lower proportion of kids who engage in drinking behavior down the road than parents who allow their kids to watch R-rated movies all the time. It's just stark, the impact. And this is one tiny thing that we would ask parents to do, is to say, don't expose your child to mature media content when they're young. There's a reason for these ratings. So we know that parents can make a difference, right? We found that to be true. And so our next step was we should develop a media parenting intervention. This is easy. But first we realized we really needed to understand what parents were doing around media and technology. So we wanted to understand, how do parents engage in selecting media for kids to watch? How do they handle co-viewing media with their child? And what do they do when they're talking to the children about media and technology? How do they handle that? So we brought parents and kids into the lab, and we showed them 6 or 7 different options that they could select for their child. And these kids were between the ages of 8 to 10 years old. And what we did is we printed up these big laminated pictures of the show that they could pick. We put in the TV rating, we put in the definition of the TV rating, and we laid them across the table and said, parents and kids, you may pick a show to watch together. And it looked kind of like this. So there was a wide range. So there were some shows that were TVY7, which means appropriate for kids ages 7 and older. And then we had some that were just general audience shows. And then we had some that were clearly for older kids, TV14. And then we had some that were mature level content shows. And what we found is a lot of negotiation that happened between child and parent and what they were able to select. And parents were just completely overwhelmed with this task. It was, I think, maybe their worst nightmare of a task we could have given them. So here is a real example of one conversation that happened between a parent and child. Mom says, I know what I want. And kid says, what do you want? I was thinking of this one, and points to The Simpsons. And mom was thinking, I'm thinking that one too. Kid says, so let's do that. Then mom remembers they're being recorded, and she says, wait, not for children under 14 years of age. How about this one for children ages 7 and above? So this might be okay. Or this one, it says for all ages. And kid says, how about this one? And points back to The Simpsons. Mom says, that's a lot older than you. Kid says, no, mom, if they don't say that, you would have said yes. Well, ha ha ha. Kid says, they would not make that as a choice if people could not watch it. And mom laughs again. All right, let's see. This program is specifically designed to be viewed by adults and may be unsuitable for children, points to South Park. This is for children ages 7 and above, points to SpongeBob. But I hate SpongeBob. Kid says, I do too. Mom says, why don't you kill this one? I think this one might be off the table, and she flips over The Simpsons option. Kid says, no, flips back over The Simpsons option. I want that one. Mom says, this has some stuff that you have not heard about that I'm not sure I'm ready to let you hear about, ha ha ha, and then flips it over again. Kid says, no, mom, that one's for over 17. Mom says, that one's off the table too. Kid says, but, the negotiation continues. I'm not sure I'm ready to have you see that. Why? I've seen these shows of them before. I've only watched one, and the jokes were just, I don't really remember. Fair enough. And then he says, how about you choose this one, and I choose the next? That makes it fair. Mom says, you're such a good little negotiator. So she is positively reinforcing him for negotiating the process. And she says, no, this thing is parental prerogative to put, and he says, they wouldn't put it up like most, like half of these say that some parents would say it's not appropriate for people over 14. But mom says, the fact that it's included in this study does not mean it's okay for you because it's a parental decision. Kid says, I've seen TV shows of this before. You're not being fair. So we can see here that this fight ensues. It goes on and on and on. And this already existed because parents didn't have clear rules about what kids could watch. They also had clearly never spoken a single time about what the TV ratings meant. So kids didn't know what it meant, parents didn't know what it meant. And then you see that kids are very, very adept at negotiating these things. Parents are less adept at negotiating them. So it becomes really complicated. So what we learned from this study across 40 parent-child dyads is that a more assertive parenting style significantly reduced the negotiation time that happened. When parents had clear rules about it, it wasn't a long negotiation. But some parents did these really incredible things. We learned from some parents. And what they did is they'd use them as the negotiations as a teachable moment. They would say, let's learn together about why this is rated this way. I want to understand it too. Help me learn, why do you think it says TV 14? What do you think that means? And so they kind of learned collaboratively, this probably isn't the right content for me. We were very surprised to see, even while being video recorded in the lab, and they knew that a very large number of parents selected shows rated well above their child's age. We had at least 2 parents select the mature rated show, which is really for adults. And so we were surprised that was happening in the lab. If it's happening in the lab, then it's definitely happening more at home. And very few children had any idea what the TV ratings were. So this is an area of growth we need to support parents around. We then watched them watch the show together. And what we learned is that we saw a lot of engagement where the parent and child were watching the show together. Something negative happened in the show. So in the Simpsons show, we selected it out to have substance use in it. The teacher gets drunk during class in the show. The parent laughs because the show is made to make that behavior look funny. The parent's laughing and the child looks at the parent and realizes, oh, this is funny. And then the parent laughs more. And the child looks at the parent, then back at the screen, then back at the parent, then back at the screen. And we see a social norming process happen where parents are saying, this is an okay behavior. And then the child looks back at the screen and laughs, and the parent look at each other and laugh together. And now we have deviancy training because we have this behavior where we're endorsing it together and we're saying this is an okay behavior and we think it's funny and okay. This is a bit of an extreme. Deviancy training is a complicated construct and usually comes from peers. But you can see how in the context of media, kids are learning how to interpret the world based on how their parents are interpreting the media as well. We are modeling all the time for our kids. They're watching how we respond to things, and they're learning from us as they're watching us. We finished up with a conversation task. So we asked the parent and child to talk about what did you like best about the show you watched, what did you like least about it, and what risk behaviors did you see? So here's an example of a conversation that happened. So mom says, what did you notice about problematic stuff? Kid says, no, nothing really. Mom says, really? Kid says, really? Mom says, really? Kid says, yeah, really. Mom says, what about when that one guy punched the other guy in the face? Kid says, oh yeah, I guess that was violence. And what about when he blew up the other guy's house and destroyed all of his stuff? And the kid says, oh yeah, that too, I guess. What about when he steamrolled over that guy and smushed him? And kid says, that was violence? Mom says, yeah, that was violence. Kid says, oh. And then mom says, oh boy, I guess we have a lot to talk about. And kid says, hey. So implications of this are basically, we know that media exposures, particularly screen media, even more so social media, may serve as a context where we can see some coercive parent-child dynamics. We have heard many a time of parents handing off their cell phones to kids in the waiting room just to keep them quiet. Right? It's reinforcing for the child to get the phone, so it reinforces the child to cry more. It's also reinforcing for the parent to hand the screen off because their child stops crying and they can sit in peace in the waiting room. So it's dually reinforcing a problematic interaction that's happening between parent and child. We know that risk depictions within media represent social learning, potentially deviancy training context for youth. And what's interesting about this point is that those associations are stronger in kids who present with lower risk. So the media risk depiction has a heavier impact on kids who don't have other risk factors. So kids who are coming from good families, kids who are academically engaged, kids who don't see a lot of drinking in their home. The media impacts are heavier for those kids. It's true for all kids, but heavier for low-risk kids. And media, and particularly social media environments, can be a bit of a proxy for how kids relate as it relates to the parent-child relationship and interaction. So one of the things that we often will tell parents is, would you send your child into a locked room where you don't know what's in that room, you don't know who's in that room, and you just let them hang out in there for hours at a time? No, you wouldn't do that. So why give your child a device that you don't know what they're doing on there, you don't know what they're being exposed to on there? You should be monitoring it. Secondarily, would you allow your child to hang out with The Simpsons as a show? Like, would that be an okay friend for your child to have? If not, why do you allow them to watch that show all the time? Why are you letting it have that influence on their life? Because it's having an impact. You'll see it across time. So what we're trying to do now is, one of the big things we want to focus on is learning how best to make media environments safer for kids. We know that kids are in the media. We know that they're consuming media. We know that they like using media. We know that the media environment is not going away. It's infused in their schools, in their home life, in their peer life. So we have to work kind of globally to make that context safer. And that's going to require all of us. It's going to require all of us to advocate for policies, but it's also going to require us to actually be present in those media environments. So one of my colleagues likes to talk about the town center analogy. You know, we have the idea of a town center as a place where people can go and spend time and hang out and be safe, because there's lots of police there, there's lots of folks looking out for the environment, there's safe adults around. We have no such context in the digital environment. So we need adults to be present in these environments. We need us to be monitoring the environments. We need to be reporting bad behaviors, and we need to be present for kids to come to us if they have something concerning happen. We also have to work to improve our media parenting practices. We have spent decades upon decades trying to understand the parenting-child dynamic in a way that we can most effectively support parents in behavioral management in their home. That should translate to how they're parenting in the digital environment. Kids need that same level of support, maybe more support, because technology is evolving so rapidly. And one of our models that we've developed around this is the model Tech Parenting. And I have a picture of this website that we're in development on right now. So Tech Parenting, it's an acronym. T stands for talk to your child about what they're being exposed to in media and through technology. E stands for educate your child about risks that they'll be exposed to in media and technology. C stands for co-use and co-view media and technology with your child actively. The actively is really important, because if you're just sitting there watching stuff with them, they might think that you're passively endorsing some of the behaviors that they're being exposed to, so it has to be active. And then the H stands for house rules. Establish clear and effective house rules around where, when, and how media and technology can be used, and what they do if they encounter or engage in something that's problematic. So that model is evidence-based, or evidence-informed. We're trying to develop it so it's evidence-based, where we're testing it with parents and children actually right now. So if you know any parents of kids who are in the middle school age range, we're looking for them to participate in our studies. We've worked with parents and kids to develop this web material. And we're trying to make it fun and engaging. And we talked a little bit, Joanna was mentioning, how a lot of these talks have highlighted the fact that we're kind of engaging them where the problem is. So this is a website. We're bringing parents in to the digital environment to engage in the material. We're giving them opportunities to practice and learn about digital technologies if they feel overwhelmed. And we're actually giving them digital and technology tools to help monitor and modify their child's media and technology use. And a lot of the activities that parents and kids are going to do through this website will be done through the website together. So they'll be in a digital space together, learning how to engage that material. The other part of this website that we're really hoping to work around is to gain better understanding of what parents' needs are, how we can meet them where they are in terms of what their needs are, and how we can educate the parent to inform the child's behavior. We're hoping also that developing media literacy skills for the parents will actually impact the parents' behavior, because parents are also being impacted by their exposures to substance use in the media as well. We are all impacted by what we're exposed to in the media. So we think that there might be a side benefit to parents participating in this, because they will also learn about these media exposures. Finally, we need to identify ways to leverage technology to promote positive health outcomes for youth. So I already mentioned this, but we want to promote more positive behavioral health spaces in digital spaces for youth. We want kids to have places to go that create positive outcomes for them, that benefit them in some form or fashion. And we want to guide them towards safe tools to be able to use without having harm. We want to train youth in digital citizenship. This is a brand new word, but we want to help kids understand, how do I engage my environment in a positive way? How do I point out problems in my peers and not support problems in my peers? How do I engage in healthy digital technology usage, like limiting myself when I shouldn't be using anymore? How do I shut my device off when it's time for bedtime? And how do I learn media literacy skills? So kids need to learn. There's an industry driving a lot of this content, and that industry wants you to become a consumer for life. So we were talking earlier today, most kids pretty much by the age of 12 to 14 have a favorite alcohol brand, even if they had never drank before. And that favorite alcohol brand, most of the time, is Budweiser. Why? Because Budweiser advertises more than any other brand. So kids are being exposed to that content, they know what it is, and they learn to like it because it's being paired with things like horses and puppies and farms and outdoor activities. And so it becomes a thing that is very engaging for kids. So we have to teach them those skills. How do you interpret these messages? How do you learn what it is that you want to be as a person? How do you learn how to develop your own wants and desires and not be so informed by industry? And then we also need to have preventative tools for youth. So I'm gonna, hopefully I have time. I think I do. We're working right now on a study called Mobile Coach Teen. It's for older adolescents, where we have developed a preventative alcohol prevention app that they download on their phone. So most alcohol prevention campaigns for teens are conducted through schools, and it's usually educational in nature. So someone comes into the school and teaches them about the risks of substance use. It's happening during the day. Usually kids think it's a joke. They don't engage the content, they don't like the content, and they're not learning the content when they're at risk. So we wanted to develop a tool that will hit them with prevention messaging at high-risk times, Friday evenings, Saturday evenings, around times when they're thinking about substance use. And so we have this app that we've developed that has coaches. The coaches are designed to look a little bit older than the kids themselves, and they can pick which coach they want. And the app gives them some information about their drinking behavior and how it relates to other kids' drinking behavior their age. Most kids overestimate how much other kids are using. So we teach them, where do you fall in this risk and what might that mean for you? And then across 12 weeks, they get coaching messages from the coach that they selected, and they participate in the intervention by engaging that coach, and the coach delivers them messages that teach them about alcohol use. And the messages are designed to be interesting, engaging. There's videos and infographics and quizzes, and the kids get information. Here are the domains. They get a welcome and farewell. They learn strategies to resist alcohol use. They get universal tips about what alcohol use does and how it impacts you. They get praise if they fall on the low risk. So the nice thing about these digital interventions is they can be tailored to the person. So when interventions are delivered through schools, it's global interventions that are designed to hit everybody. If I've never drank before, what I need is different than what somebody else might need if they are drinking all the time. But these digital interventions can be personalized to your risk level. So low-risk kids get praise for that. We teach everybody media literacy. We talk about alcohol-related problems. We teach them about why they might want to reduce their use and how they can interpret their own expectancies, what they think will happen when they use. And then for higher risk kids, we talk about risk reduction strategies. So a couple examples here is just the welcome message, and then here's an example of strategies to resist. So saying no to a drink is not always easy. The good news is it gets easier every time you say no. Give it a try and just say you're sitting out this round. People will be impressed that you're a person who makes their own choices. We also are leveraging things we know matter to kids. They care about what their peers think. They care about social messaging. They care about the quality of their interactions. We also have these universal tips. If you choose to drink, always start with an alcohol-free drink first. Keep your drinking within healthy limits. It's better to stand out from your peers for making the choice to stay in control of your body than to stand out for doing something you would regret because you lose control. Keep making strong choices. Media literacy, so alcohol companies pay famous people to market their products. They do this to make their brand more attractive to you. Some celebrities don't even like the brands that they're paid to promote. And alcohol-related problems. You mentioned that drinking or drug use has impacted your mood or energy level. If you limit your drinking, you'll have the energy you need to perform well at school and participate in fun activities. And these messages are designed to be engaging and positive. We've already tested it with about 30 kids, and they liked the messages, they enjoyed them, they found them to be easy to receive, and they liked the timing. And they actually, many of them wanted more. They wanted messages every day. We were giving them a couple times a week. And here's an example of importance reduction. Hi, it's great that you limit your drinking. Limiting alcohol helps you keep your mind and body healthy. And then here's an example of a quiz, or no, this is risk reduction. So what strategy would be best for you to help drinking little or no alcohol tonight? When I'm going out with friends, I will either distract myself with my phone or I'll set a limit for myself. They pick one and then we follow up with them the next day to see how did it go? Did it go well? And if they struggled, we give them some strategies. If it went well, we give them praise. So that is sort of where we're at right now with our current studies. We have other studies going on in terms of understanding the global media environment and how it's impacting kids and their addictive behaviors. But we're also very oriented towards understanding good preventative strategies and intervention approaches that we can use to reduce risk in the digital environment. So thank you so much for your time and interest.
Thank you, Joy. This was very interesting. Questions, Bill?
I really like the thing that you showed at the end where they can interact with the kid. And I can see it could be very positive. Has anyone thought about adding gamification to that to keep them there, keep them coming back?
Yes, so that is, we actually have this app that we're using is an open source app that you can modify. And so this was a pilot feasibility study, so we just basically needed to show NIDA that we could get kids to participate and that they'd stay engaged with the messages. Our next step is to do more personalization, add in more messages, because that's what the kids asked for, and gamify. So this was based off of a Swiss study that they had already tested it for efficacy and found that, and they had gamification in their protocol. It's a higher level of intensity in terms of programming. So we wanted to be sure we had the funding to be able to build that in. It's very expensive. That's one of the problems with these digital technology interventions is they cost a lot of money to do them well. But there's a point system involved with their engagement. Yep, they earn points and credits. There's a contest built in, a couple of different contests that they're actually doing with peers. They don't know who the peers are, but it's a group sort of thing. And there's a specialist at UF actually who does gamification studies for addiction as well that we were talking about a partnership for this particular app. So that you're thinking ahead, but yeah. Hi.
So Joy, this is great work that you're doing. Thank you. I wish you had gotten to my grandson a little sooner. So yeah, in the very beginning, you had a chart that showed effects on alcohol use, and it had a lot of straight lines. In one, the lines were up and down, and then in the next one, I think it was the first one might have been smoking, and then it was alcohol use.
Yep.
And in that chart, very near what looked like, if I was interpreting it right, the most extreme effects was old age.
Yes, age is across kids. So if you compare a 10-year-old to an 18-year-old, the 18-year-old is 20-fold more likely to be using substances than the 10-year-old.
I see.
The developmental risk trajectory is exponential. So as kids get older year by year, their risk for substances increases exponentially. So it's always age, everything. The fact actually, it's a very good point. The fact that media impacts are so close in scope to the age impact is phenomenal. Age and media use are also highly associated. So as kids get older, they're using media and technology more and more independently. But we're also seeing younger and younger kids having access to devices younger and younger and younger, and they're starting to be more technologically savvy than their parents younger and younger and younger. So, I mean, I think there probably is going to be a little bit of shift in terms of the impact of media as well across the younger kid ages. But yes, you're right. Age is a significant predictor of substance use.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Joy, have you worked with PACE Center for Girls?
I know of PACE Center for Girls. I actually was supposed to do a lecture on motivational interviewing, but I never quite got it scheduled, but I've heard of them.
Well, what would be so wonderful is that you have Girls of Promise, and PACE Center involves parents. And I think this would be an ideal program to introduce there.
Sure, would love to.
And I'd be happy to help facilitate that.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, let's talk about that.
And another program I was going to just walk up and tell you about, but are you aware of the Guardian Ad Litem program?
One of my grad students is a Guardian Ad Litem, so yes, we're well aware.
As I think that the program you just presented would be excellent for the advocate, the Guardian Ad Litem, to hear about as part of their training, and then how they might involve some of their families in the program.
Yeah, we didn't touch on this, but one of the things that people most often think about when they think about digital and technology risks is human trafficking and kids' exposure to, problematic abuses that perpetrators will do. That does happen, and that's a serious risk, but it's very small in terms of proportion. The alcohol exposure risk, and if you were to ask me which thing do I think is most impactful, I'd say the substance use depictions in the media is the highest impact across the largest number of kids. That being said, a whole nother layer to this is monitoring and supervision, and kids in the foster care system or kids who are in any system involvement, they often have very little monitoring happening in their environments, and they're being exposed to a lot of mature content, through their devices. The other side of my research is on early life adversity, and I work on studies with kids in foster care as well. They tend towards much higher risk for substance use problems. They initiate a lot earlier than kids in the general population, and I also look to them epidemiologically as the example of where we're going as a society. So we've already seen kids in the foster care system using more cannabis, and so we expect kids in the general population are going to be using more cannabis because it's just a population of higher risk. But yeah, it's a very interesting overlap. They definitely need these supports as well. Oh, sure, and they could maybe coach and educate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey.
The program that you were describing at the end to what extent is that available to anyone? Is that only for your research purposes at the moment?
The mobile coach one, the one on the phones, or
Yes.
the tech parenting one?
I'm sorry?
The one for parents or the one for kids?
The one for the kids that you were describing.
Yeah, so we have it developed. We have a version of it. We just are in the process of applying for, 2 grants. One to develop it out for alcohol prevention, further develop it out with the gamification, other things to add in, and also to do it for vaping prevention, because we know that that's another big issue for teenagers. So we don't have an active app for people to use at the moment because we haven't finished the development on that. We need funding to be able to do that, but the content's ready. So, and we have it semi-built out. What I need to do is get funding so that we can fully test it and then deliver it to the world, basically. Yeah.
Thank you.
So hopefully we will.
That sounds wonderful.
I have a question online. I thought that, excuse me, some of the responses during your digital campaign were kind of powder puff, and I would recommend mixing in some harder hitting responses that they'll remember years later. These are pretty much forgettable.
You mean the text messaging campaign?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Part of it is there's a balance with engagement. So for kids who are already using substances, if you come to them and you throw in their face that the behavior that they're doing is harmful, it's going to hurt them, da 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 da, they will shut down. So I also am a clinician. I work with adolescents in my adolescent outpatient clinic, and we do this work all the time where we're having these conversations with kids. And if you come to them and say, what you're doing is wrong, you need to stop, they'll leave. They won't come back to session.
I didn't say to use that approach, but there are ways more subtle to get that across. Just so you'll know, I used to be a copywriter, big agency, and our group advertised Marlboro, Schlitz, and Taster's Choice coffee.
Yeah.
So I'm just letting you know from my standpoint, there are ways to get it across subtly, but effectively.
Right,
You
right.
aren't doing it.
Okay.
And to say no is not subtle.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have a question on Zoom. Glenn Mott?
Yes, thank you very much. Terrific program. I wish we could multiply you by 1,000-fold across the country. But I did have a question about media, and obviously it took many decades to restrict the media from tobacco sales. How much effort has there been in this area of alcohol?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm a little disheartened. We do all the same approaches that we have done with tobacco to advocate for public policy changes around this. I think we're at a little bit of a disadvantage because alcohol industry has the example of tobacco industry to help them avoid making mistakes that tobacco industry made in terms of being regulated. So one of the big things that happened with the tobacco industry was they had a document breach, and we learned that they were deceiving the public and falsifying research documents, et cetera. I'm sure the same thing is happening in the domain of alcohol, but it's tricky, that we don't have the capacity to necessarily show the direct linkage. It's more difficult to make the case for the direct linkage between alcohol use in adolescence and death, basically. It's easier to draw that connection between tobacco use and cancer. So we know that there's an association, and we know that it works through, these mediating illnesses of cancer, obesity, and other things, but we haven't been as effective at countering, industry's approach to their ability to self-regulate. So right now, alcohol industry self-regulates its approach to media and marketing to youth. They are saying, we are watching it, and we're making sure that we're not doing it. But we know that it's happening. We have study after study showing that kids are being exposed to the marketing. So it's a complicated process. But I'll tell you that every paper I publish on alcohol exposures in the media, I am also making public policy recommendations. And we have seen some movement around some of the more recent releases from the Surgeon General about concerns for mental health impacts of social media in adolescents. So there's some movement there, I think, in terms of folks recognizing the media environments are potentially impacting youth behavior. But I agree with you. I think that's the place to go if we want to really have preventative effects.
I would agree definitely that is an area that we could do a lot better in, because I hear in the alcohol media world promotion of false information about the benefits of alcohol, particularly in heart disease. And as a member of the American Heart Association for many decades, I know that they have not promoted alcohol to prevent heart disease. And their consensus conference years ago clearly states that it is not recommended for primary prevention or secondary prevention of heart disease. And yet this is constantly a mistaken idea that's promoted by many, many sources.
Right, and the behavior that's initiated in adolescence pervades into adulthood. So it's a really critical time. So I completely agree with you on that.
Well, best of luck in working on that issue too.
Thank you.
In one of your graphs, I saw that you were, or whoever made up that data, were measuring a propensity to commit violence also. So it seems certainly logical to me that if children are exposed to movies and television programs, as they are increasingly apparently, where there's violence, extreme violence, people being killed, beat up, that this would be reflected in children's behavior. But it seems to me that years ago, some decades perhaps, there was this denial across the board from the pediatric profession that no, there's no coherence or no relationship between what children are seeing on the screen and their behavior. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure. I mean, I think the current stance in terms of what's available for scientific evidence suggests there is a very clear link between exposures to media depictions of things and kids' behavior. It gets complicated around different types of behavior. There's a lot of theories about why being exposed to something like substance use in the media would result in an association of increased substance use risk for kids. The aggression violence is very complicated and contentious. There's a very split group of people. Some people believe there's a clear and strong association. I worked on a study that was looking at video game violence and how that associates with acts of violence in kids. And it was a meta-analysis looking across a bunch of different studies, and the outcome was globally, yes, there is an association between high levels of exposure to video game violence, it had to be extreme, and kids' aggressive behavior down the road. But the other side of the argument is that those are very small effects, and so it's a small proportion of youth who are being impacted by that. My hypothesis on that particular issue is that there are some kids who are predisposed to aggressive behaviors, and those kids, when they engage in violent video game play, are more likely to engage in violent behaviors in the built world. There are other kids who are not predisposed to aggressive behavior, and they can play violent video games and not have an increased risk for aggression. So it's a difference in terms of groups, I think, and we're getting that messed up because we're looking at very large samples of hundreds of kids. We're grouping them all together, and we're not recognizing that there's individual differences in propensity for risk prior to the environmental exposure. It's a messy, complicated area, but the substance use literature is clear. If you're exposed to more substance use behavior in the media, you will initiate earlier and you will have increased risk for progression to substance use problems. Other areas, I think we're still figuring out how to do the studies appropriately to fully understand what that mechanism is. There's a ton of social learning research. The Bobo doll experiment is a really good one. People have replicated that with things like, there's a study in pediatrics where they showed young kids a video of somebody picking up a gun and shooting, and then they put them into a playroom and they looked to see the kids who were exposed to that video versus not. Did they pick up the fake gun and shoot it in the room? And the kids who were exposed to the video of shooting did pick up the fake gun and shoot it. The kids who were not did not. So that was a very compelling link between that behavior, and it was experimentally manipulated, which was lovely. But we need more of that type of research to fully understand that mechanism, but it's a good question.
Any more questions? Okay.
I was really intrigued by in your talking about your web app that kids could use, that you interact with them 2 times a week, and many of them want to interact with you more. And I just got this image in my head that you see a lot of parents on their phone and kids on their phone, and that kids really want someone to pay attention to them.
Yes.
and give them good feedback, which is why they're on their phone. They're looking for that somewhere in their phone. And so I guess, I know that you have talked about other programs where the parents and the children interact together on the phone. But just,
yeah. I think an interesting connection to that might be to have parents also be able to send their kids messages through the app. about how they're proud of them or how they really are glad that they're working hard at school or whatever it might be.
I think it's good to have a parent-free zone, but it's also, I think, important to
kind of think about how to integrate as well. Yeah, I agree.
Just extrapolating from your media effects, what about the effect of books on children's behavior? We're having all these book banning going on.
I don't know that literature, to be honest. I haven't spent a ton of time thinking, but I think there's a couple things about books and behavior. I think one is that kids are taking what they're reading and they're building out their own imaginative worlds around it. In media, they're given the answer. They're shown what it is. I think you'll have that experience where folks will say, I read the book and then I watched the movie, and the movie was not, it took me away from my imaginative place that the book took me. It's a different experience. So I think there's a little bit more to media exposures than books in terms of behavior formation, because we're showing you what it is that we want you to think, whereas books are a little bit more vague, I think. But it's tough. I actually don't know what the literature is on, kids reading mature content. Maybe that would be an association.
With their addiction to media, they probably are not spending time reading books anyway.
Well, there's also a lot less in terms of, books aren't pinging you to come read them. Yeah. You're not able to hit like on the book. You're not able to share the book that you read with your friend who then likes that you like that book. You're not having, identity formation with the book, so I think, yeah, it's a little bit different. There's no gamification in books, it's not like
instant gratification, right? Yeah, okay. Anything.
It is,
right,
yeah.
Right. It's easier with the social media. Well, thank you so much, Joy. I really appreciate your coming out today. Next week is our final talk in this series, and the speaker is Dr. Barry Setlow, who will talk on the effects of age. Now we are talking our age, on impulsivity, risk-taking, and addictive behavior. So hope to see you all then. Thank you.